The most powerful god in Greek mythology took his throne by overthrowing his own father. And that was the gentlest thing he ever did. Because Zeus's greatest fear was never a mortal enemy, a monster, or even a rival god. His greatest fear was his own children. The king of Olympus, ruler of sky and thunder, spent centuries terrified of the one thing he could never control, his own bloodline. To understand why, we have to go back before Zeus was even born. Because his story doesn't begin with a throne. It begins with cannibalism. His father, Cronus, had heard a prophecy. One of his own children would rise up and overthrow him, just as Cronus himself had once overthrown his own father. His solution was simple, and it was horrifying. Every time his wife Rhea gave birth, Cronus swallowed the newborn whole. Not killed, not banished, swallowed alive, trapped inside him, still living, still conscious. 5 children disappeared this way. 5 times, Rhea watched her newborn vanish into her husband's mouth, powerless to stop it. By the 6th pregnancy, she couldn't do it again. So she deceived him. When Zeus was born, she hid him away in a cave on the island of Crete, guarded by nymphs and by armored warriors called the Curetes, who clashed their spears against their shields to drown out the baby's cries so Cronus wouldn't hear him. Then she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and handed it to Cronus instead. Cronus swallowed the stone without a second thought. He never noticed the difference. And in that single act of deception, the child who would one day rule the universe survived. Hidden in a cave, raised on goat's milk, while his father sat on a throne, utterly unaware that his own downfall was growing up in secret just a few miles away. That's how Zeus survived. But surviving wasn't enough for him. Once he grew into a young god, he had exactly one goal: freeing the brothers and sisters his father had swallowed years earlier. He didn't do it with force. He did it with poison. With the help of the goddess Metis, Zeus tricked Cronus into drinking a potion that made him vomit up everything he had swallowed. Not just the stone, but all 5 of his children, fully grown, fully alive, having somehow survived inside their father for years. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon all emerged at once. This wasn't a joyful family reunion. It was the opening move of a war. That war is called the Titanomachy, a 10-year conflict between the old generation of gods, the Titans, and the new generation led by Zeus. It was brutal. Mountains were hurled. The earth itself seemed to split apart, and Zeus knew he couldn't win it alone. So he freed 2 groups of monstrous beings his father had imprisoned in the deepest pit of the underworld. The Cyclopes, one-eyed giants of incredible craftsmanship, and the Centaurs, 100-handed giants of unimaginable strength. Grateful to be freed, they turned the tide of the war. The Centaurs hurled boulders like pebbles, and the Cyclopes forged Zeus a weapon unlike anything that had existed before, the thunderbolt. Zeus won. Cronus and the Titans were defeated and imprisoned in Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit beneath the underworld, sealed away for eternity. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to divide the universe between them. Zeus took the sky, and with it, he took the throne. He was now king of Olympus. But here's where the story gets darker, not lighter. Because the fear that had haunted his father never actually disappeared. It just moved to the next generation. It moved into Zeus himself. His first wife was the same goddess who had helped him free his siblings, Metis. When she became pregnant, Zeus heard a new prophecy. The child she carried would grow up to be more powerful than he was. A son who would dethrone him, exactly the way he had dethroned Cronus, exactly the way Cronus had dethroned his own father before that. Zeus's solution was identical to his father's. He didn't imprison Metis. He didn't banish her. He swallowed her whole. Months later, he was struck with a headache so violent, so unbearable, that he begged another god to split his skull open with an axe just to relieve the pain. And when his head was split open, out stepped a fully grown, fully armored goddess, Athena, born not from a womb, but from her father's own mind. Zeus's most famous weapon, the very thing that made him unstoppable, wasn't even his own creation. It was a gift, forged by beings he had freed from his father's prison. Even the king of the gods owed his power to someone else's hands. But power was never his real weakness. His real weakness had a much simpler name: desire. And it's here that his story stops being about thrones and wars, and starts becoming something far messier and far more human. His marriage to Hera was legendary, and not for the reasons you'd expect from a queen of the gods. It was legendary for how often, and how creatively, Zeus betrayed it. He transformed into a swan to approach Leda. He transformed into a bull to abduct Europa, carrying her across the sea on his back. He transformed into a shower of golden rain to reach Danae, who had been locked in a tower specifically to keep every man, mortal or divine, away from her. He even took the form of a woman's own husband, disguising himself as Amphitryon to conceive Heracles, meaning Alcmene didn't even know she had been deceived until it was far too late. He didn't limit himself to women, either. When Zeus became infatuated with a beautiful mortal prince named Ganymede, he transformed into an eagle, swooped down from the sky, and carried the boy off to Olympus to serve as cupbearer to the gods, granting him immortality in exchange for his father's grief. And then there's Semele, whose story is arguably the most tragic of them all. Zeus fell for her while disguised as a mortal, and she became pregnant with a child who would one day become the god of wine, Dionysus. Hera discovered the affair and, rather than attacking Semele directly, she disguised herself as an old friend and planted a seed of doubt in Semele's mind. How could she be certain her lover was truly Zeus, and not some ordinary man lying to her? Semele, consumed by the question, begged Zeus to reveal himself in his true divine form, and made him swear an unbreakable oath on the river Styx before he even knew what she would ask. Zeus had no choice. An oath on the Styx could not be broken, not even by the king of the gods himself. So he appeared before her as he truly was, wrapped in raw, untamed divine lightning. And Semele, a mortal woman standing before the full, unfiltered power of a god, was incinerated instantly. Zeus barely managed to save their unborn child, tearing him from her body and sewing him into his own thigh until he was ready to be born a second time, which is exactly why Dionysus carries the title twice born. A single promise, forced by jealousy and trickery, ended a woman's life and gave the world a god. Each of these encounters produced children who would go on to become some of the most famous figures in all of Greek mythology: Heracles, Perseus, Helen of Troy, Dionysus. In other words, an enormous portion of Greek legend exists only because of Zeus's infidelity. But every affair fed Hera's fury, and Hera's revenge became some of the cruelest storylines in the entire mythos. She tormented Heracles for his entire life, driving him into a fit of madness that led him to kill his own family, a tragedy that could only be atoned for through his famous. And yet, this same god who dealt out infinite punishment could also be the most generous host imaginable. In the story of Baucis and Philemon, Zeus and Hermes disguised themselves as ordinary travelers and went door to door through a village, testing the villagers' hospitality. Every single household turned them away, except for one elderly couple, desperately poor, who offered them everything they had. In return, Zeus spared that couple from a flood he sent to destroy the rest of the village for its cruelty, and granted them a request to die together, at the same moment, so neither would ever have to grieve the other. That flood wasn't the only one. In one of the darkest chapters of Greek mythology, Zeus grew so disgusted with the corruption and violence of humanity that he decided to wipe out the entire human race with a devastating flood. Only two mortals survived, Deucalion and Pyrrha, warned in advance and instructed to build an ark. Sound familiar? This flood myth predates, parallels, and in some traditions may even connect to flood stories found across entirely different cultures and religions, a detail that raises fascinating questions about how ancient civilizations, separated by oceans and centuries, all seem to remember the same catastrophe. It's worth pausing here, because this is exactly why the Greeks didn't worship Zeus as a single, simple figure. They worshipped him under dozens of different titles, each one representing a different face of his authority. As Zeus Xenios, he protected travelers and guests, which is precisely why turning away a stranger, as almost every villager did to him in Hermes, was treated as an offense against the king of the gods himself. As Zeus Horkios, he was the guardian of oaths, the very reason his promise on the river Styx to Semele could never be broken, no matter how much he regretted making it. His symbols reinforced every part of this identity: the thunderbolt representing raw, uncontestable power, the eagle representing his sight over the entire world, and the oak tree representing endurance, rooted at his oldest sanctuary in Dodona, where priests were said to interpret prophecy from the rustling of its leaves. Even after securing his throne, Zeus's reign was tested again and again. In the Gigantomachy, an entire race of giants rose up to avenge the imprisoned Titans, and the war that followed nearly toppled Olympus a second time. But the most dangerous threat Zeus ever faced wasn't a Titan or a giant at all. It was a monster called Typhon, a creature so massive that his head was said to scrape the stars, with 100 serpent heads erupting from his shoulders, each one hissing fire. When Typhon attacked Olympus, most of the gods fled in terror, transforming into animals and scattering across Egypt. Zeus stood and fought, and for the first time in his reign, he lost. Typhon overpowered him, cut the sinews from his arms and legs, and left the king of the gods helpless, unable to move, hidden away in a cave while the monster who defeated him guarded the very tendons that had given him his strength. It took Hermes and the god Pan to sneak in and steal them back, restoring Zeus's power just in time for him to return and finish the battle, ultimately burying Typhon beneath a volcano, said by some to be the origin of Mount Etna itself. Think about that for a moment. The king of the universe, the god who overthrew his own father, who swallowed his own wife out of fear, who fathered the heroes of an entire civilization, was, for one terrifying moment, completely powerless, utterly at the mercy of something he couldn't defeat alone. And prophecy caught up with him one final time. Zeus once desired a sea goddess named Thetis, and pursued her the way he had pursued so many others before her. But he was warned, some versions say by the Titan Prometheus himself, still chained to that same rock, that Thetis was fated to bear a son greater than his father. Any father, including Zeus. For the first time, the god who had ignored every warning, swallowed every threat, and crushed every rebellion, chose not to act on his desire. He arranged for Thetis to marry a mortal man instead, a hero named Peleus. Their son would go on to become the single greatest warrior of the Trojan War, Achilles. So even the king of the gods, at the absolute peak of his power, was still shaped entirely by fear. Fear of a prophecy. Fear of a child stronger than himself. The exact same fear that had defined his father and his father's father before him. Here is the truth hiding underneath every myth about Zeus. He ruled the sky. He commanded lightning. He fathered heroes and gods and legends. And yet, every major decision of his existence, hiding as an infant, swallowing his own wife, sparing a hospitable elderly couple, refusing to pursue Thetis, was driven not by strength, but by fear. Zeus's story isn't really a story about absolute power. It's a story about how the most powerful being in existence can still be a prisoner of his own anxiety, still be haunted by the same insecurities as everyone beneath him. Maybe that's exactly why his story has survived for nearly 3,000 years. Because deep down, it isn't really a story about a god at all. It's a story about what power does to anyone who holds it, immortal or otherwise. But here's the question that history itself seems to answer. Did that prophecy about Thetis's son really end there? Because Achilles didn't just become the greatest warrior in the world. He became the spark of a war that would bring down an entire city, reshape Greek mythology, and indirectly test the throne of Olympus one more time. In the next video, we're going to follow that thread and meet the one figure who came closer to bringing Zeus's entire order crashing down than any titan, any giant, or any monster ever did. Subscribe now, because you will not want to miss where this story goes next.